how do you describe it being distinct from Christianity and Islam? I know that you've touched on a couple things, Jesus, but how, in a nutshell, how would you kind of explain the differences? Yeah.
Well, Jesus actually is one of the differences in that for Christians, of course, Jesus is the Son of God, the object of worship. We would regard Jesus as a historical person, a great teacher, obviously, a great, powerful preacher, full stop. In other words, acknowledging those gifts of teaching and preaching, but then stopping there and not going on to say he was God or Son of God or the Messiah. And for us, the reason for that is a very simple litmus test, again, practicalities. The Jewish concept of the Messiah was someone who brings peace or ushers in an era of peace. And we look at television or we look at the papers and just, still rapes and murders and wars and civil wars and strife and corruption. So clearly, for us, the Messiah isn't yet here. I suppose we would say that Christianity, or Christians would say, well, yes, it will come in the second coming. But we'd say, well, hang on, that's not part of the original job spec. It was supposed to be the first time round, mate. And therefore, for us, the Messiah hasn't come. And that's not just my view. I mean, actually, it's funny enough, it's even within the Gospels, because there's this bit in or the New Testament, rather, in the Acts of the Apostles, when some people rush into the Sanhedrin, which is a Jewish parliament at the time in the first century, and say, look, there's this Jesus preaching and claiming to be all sorts of things. And there's a particular rabbi, and again, it's in the Acts of the Apostles in the chapter itself. And he says, well, let's wait and see. If he's a Messiah, great, wonderful. And if he's not, okay, well, never mind, carry on waiting.
On the, I guess, to be a bit of a devil's advocate, for viewers who might be Christian and who might be, roaring in their chair or something like that. So, what would you say to the kind of maybe response that there might be evil in this world, but perhaps evil still exists, or immorality, let's say, because of free will, because just because Jesus came, that doesn't mean we don't have free will still. What would you say back to that?
Well, okay, but the whole point for us of the Messiah, or as actually we tend to put more emphasis on the era, the Messianic era, because what's important is not so much the Messiah, but the era of peace is ushers in, it's an era of peace, and that's the whole point. So there wouldn't be to do all the rapes and the murder and the pillaging. Now, you could say, well, that's a very unlikely scenario. The whole thing about the Messianic era is really to offer a better vision of this world and say that what we've got is not the final version. And everyone will know that there have been moments when things really go right and people really pull together and root together. It could be in the family, everyone sort of being nice to each other, or in a sort of street or village, or when there's a sort of, a jubilee coronation, and people are just pleasant and friendly and helpful and cheerful. And it may only last 20 minutes or even a day. Well, we know it can exist. So let's make that a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or forever. So that possibility is still there. And also, the Jewish view is you don't just sit back and wait for the Messiah to appear and twiddle our thumbs, but we actually hasten the Messiah by trying to make this world a better place. And there's a good Jewish tradition that the Messiah will only come when we're almost there because of what our efforts have done to make this world a better place. And then his arrival is the final seal. By the way, just to pick you up, you said you're going to play devil's advocate. Well, I don't know if you were going to come onto this, but actually we don't believe in the devil. In other words, in Judaism, there's no concept of an outside evil force, a Satan or whatever. Certainly people can do rotten things, horrible things, but that's because they choose to, not because they're being seduced by an outside force. So we would believe that everyone is born completely free will, and as a blank slate, we've got no evil, we've got no original sin, and it's up to us. And we all have both good instincts and bad instincts. It can be very selfish or very altruistic, and it's up to us to choose which way we follow.
It seems that Judaism, out of the Islam and Christianity, it seems like it's a far more actionable religion, as in the sense that Judaism, especially from what you described, is about your behavior, how you doing good, how you act. From the outside looking in, it seems that Judaism is far more to itself. It's less proselytizing than the other monotheisms.
Okay, well, you've covered a lot of ground. Let's deal with the practical. I mean, the answer is I think it is. That's not to diminish any of the other faiths or their attributes, but it's very noticeable that whereas like in Christianity, you have the 39 Articles of Faith, which are the foundation of the Church of England. For us, we don't have Articles of Faith. We have the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt do this and do that. It's not about believing so much, but doing and getting on with it. And in Judaism, the heretic is not so much the person who believes the wrong thing, but who does the wrong thing. So we're very relaxed about concepts of God, and whereas sort of the Christians have had all sorts of wars, over heresies, and the Catholics and the Protestants and the Anabaptists and the Calvinists and the Zwinglians and all the rest of it, and quite a lot of persecution as to the wrong belief. We've been much more laid back and said, well, we can't necessarily define God, because if God's immortal and we're temporal, if God's incorporeal and we're not, how can we sort of define God? Once you define God, you limit them and put them in your pocket, so to speak. So we just say God is somehow responsible for the world and leave it at that. And therefore, actually, what we believe doesn't really matter. Because God's not like one of the fairies in Peter Pan, where every time you say, I don't believe in fairies or God, one of them falls away. So what really counts is what we do. It doesn't matter what you believe. It's, do you help a little old lady across the road? Do you give to charity when you see it? Do you smile at someone or scowl at them? So it's actually getting on with people and how you behave that determines whether you're a good Jew. Which is why, by the way, although this may sound strange to some people, you can have atheist Jews. And you can't really be an atheist Christian. You really do have to believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. But a lot of Jews are really a bit unsure about God, but they're still Jewish because they believe in Jewish roots and Jewish values, and Jewish traditions, and getting on with it. I'm generalizing quite a bit because there's a lot of Jews who do believe very faithfully in God. But what I'm saying is that if you wanted to make a contrast, you could say that Christianity is much more about belief and faith, whereas Judaism is much more about action. It's not to say that Christians aren't active and good and helpful and charitable, but in terms of some of the contrasts, and which is why, going on to your other point, Judaism isn't interested in proselytizing or converting other people. Most synagogues have a conversion class, as I do at Maidenhead, but it's only for people who want to convert. I'm genuinely not, and I always tell them right at the beginning, look, you're welcome to come on the course, because the course about Jewish knowledge, but I don't actually care whether you do or not, and I don't care whether you drop out. If you want to stay, great, I'm there to help. But we're not into a numbers game. We're not into converting people. We believe that there are many paths to God, and it actually doesn't matter whether you call God or Adonai or Christ or Allah or Buddha. It's getting there. It's being a good person, and so we're not into a numbers game.
Yeah, and I must say that the fact in Judaism that it is far more varied in how it conceptualizes God. For example, I guess Judaism follows I think it was Augustine who said it. Even though he was Christian, but he said something along the lines of, "If it is God you are thinking of, it is not God," and that kind of was supposed to mean that, like, to conceptualize God is to negate what God is, and it is to even perhaps go further away from what it means. And I must admit, I'm fully behind that kind of idea, because as you kind of imply, a divine entity, deity, to me at least, Judaism actually has the most logical perspective on it, because by definition, God is transcendent, beyond the mortality that we have and the mere words that we have. And so, yeah, honestly speaking, I do think Judaism holds the strongest conceptualization of God, because, as you say, otherwise it's quite literally in Christianity, it's more of a bodily interpretation. Jesus, for example. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose, to be fair, every religion has its weaknesses, but also its strengths. Judaism is very good on action and deeds and community and camaraderie. Christianity is probably much better on spirituality. Islam is probably better on discipline. Buddhism is better on self-knowledge. So, if you like, it depends what you're looking for in the religious supermarket.
Religious supermarket. I like that. I like that. So could you go more into Islam and how that's distinct from Judaism? Because we've covered Christianity a decent amount.
Yeah, I mean, well, often people think that Christians and Jews are more like each other than Jews and Muslims, but in many ways it's Jews and Muslims who are more similar because the values are more or less the same, and a lot of the rituals are the same. Whether it's and Islam is much more into rituals than Christianity. I mean, by which I mean, of course, there are, because most of the doing stuff for a Christian is a church. You know, the Eucharist and the communion, and whereas for Jews and also for Muslim, a lot of the rituals are home-based. I mean, at least 50% of Jewish rituals or festivals all take place in the home, and you can, don't tell my congregants this, you can almost be a good Jew and never go to synagogue in your life because so much takes place at home. And which, by the way, is one of the reasons why it survived despite the odds and the persecutions, because children grow up with it and see it in the home and take it as natural. So going back to Islam, you know, two obvious examples is one is both go in for circumcision of male babies. Both have food laws such as the banning of pork and bacon and ham. So there's a lot of commonality. And I suppose people thought of the two as being very loggerheads, really because of the problems between Israel and some of the Arab neighbors. But that's very modern, and it's only been the last 70 years or so. Islam and Judaism in many ways got on better than Jews and Christians. I mean, we're in an interfaith era, so that's all changed now. But the problem with Jews and Christians was that Jews were always the villains in the Christian story. I mean, you know, according to the Gospels, the Jews were responsible for the death of Jesus. And actually, if you think of all the sins in the world, I mean, murder, killing is pretty bad, but killing the Son of God has to be top of the list. You can't really get much worse than that. So it means that, unfortunately, Jews always have this negative perception within the Christian story. Whereas, you know, no other faith has that negative role within the Christian story. And Jews don't have that negative role in any other faith. They don't feature badly in Sikhism or Confucianism or Buddhism or Islam or Jainism or any of them. So there's been this unique, almost poison in the relationship between Jews and Christianity, because even though Jesus and the disciples all were Jewish and stemmed from Judaism, this poison in later teachings has really affected subsequent centuries. Conversely, Jews and Muslims just don't have that negative backstory.